Welcome back. It was the perfect storm. Extreme winter weather dipping into the deep south, pushing an already failing power grid to catastrophe in the state of Texas. So could Connecticut's power grid be crippled in the same way? Here to talk about that, State Senator Norm Needleman. He's the chairman of the Senate Energy and Technology Committee, and Dr. Mark Paul, a professor of economics and environmental studies at the New College of Florida. Dr. Paul, I want to start with you and ask you, you study this. This is what you do with your life's work. So everyone in Connecticut saw those pictures of flooding pipes from ceilings and the horrible conditions happening down in Texas. Do we need to be worried about that here?
Great to be here with you today, Eric. Thanks for having me on. Look, what happened in Texas was a horrendous catastrophe, but what you said was exactly right. It was an already failing grid. Here in Connecticut, that is not at all the case we're in. No, we don't need to be worried about having a similar catastrophe strike our state. That said, there's a lot that we could do to improve our energy system that would, make sure that Connecticut residents have more reliable energy, cheaper energy, and cleaner energy. So there's a lot of ground we could be making up right now, but I don't think we're ever going to be facing a disaster like the one that just struck Texas.
All right, that is certainly news that people here will be happy to hear. Senator Needleman, let me turn to you. After Storm Isaias last year, the tropical storm, you called Eversource's response an epic failure. You're on the committee that oversees the utilities here in Connecticut. Where do things stand now in your oversight?
Well, I think that there were a lot of failures with Isaias that were very specific to Connecticut, like the number of trees we have and the number of crews that Eversource had available to them, their response, their failure in some measure with their emergency operations plan. But we do have a relatively vulnerable grid because we're a very treed and wooded state. And most of our power lines, as you all know, are above ground. I tend to agree with the professor that the likelihood of what happened in Texas, a similar event, is low, but I would never jump and say that our grid isn't vulnerable. It's vulnerable in other ways. So I think we have done much better planning than Texas has done, but I do also believe that we are all vulnerable to the impacts of weather and exacerbated by climate change. So.
And in your role there in the legislature, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about things like having automatic credits on bills if there's an extended power outage. We just heard over the past couple of weeks, Eversource's CEO saying they're going to be passing some of the costs from Isaias and other big storms on to customers. What do you in the legislature and your fellow legislators, what can you do to try to improve that reliability, and what have you done already?
So we've pressured the utilities. Didn't need that much pressuring to work on hardening and the grid and improving resiliency. It's also important to note. First of all, I'm not going to jump the gun and make any comments about Texas. I think there were failures there for sure. They're not part of a regional grid operator. They don't have a forward capacity market where they buy energy. But we have a lot of other safeguards in place. The reality is, as you saw from a storm that had 85-mile-an-hour winds, we were without power for 8 days. Luckily, it was in warm weather, but I've been a first selectman longer than I've been a senator, and I know what power outages are like from weather conditions, and we have issues. I agree with the professor that resiliency, renewables, reliability, these are all part of our future. And my committee is working very hard with DEEP and with PURA to make sure that we get there.
Dr. Paul, you're a New England guy, grew up in Massachusetts, so you know the things that Senator Needleman's talking about, the tree growth here and some of the other above ground wires that we have to deal with. So what are the answers in your research? What should Connecticut consumers and legislators be pushing for?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that we can improve the resiliency of Connecticut's grid, and I agree that while it's far from perfect, it's a lot better off than Texas, there still are a lot of vulnerabilities. So one thing we should be thinking about here in Connecticut is diversifying our energy infrastructure. Right now, where the state is primarily reliant on natural gas, with nuclear making up number two. But the state should be heavily investing in renewables and diversifying its actual energy generation. Because in Connecticut, during the tropical storm, the main crisis was down power lines from trees. In Texas, the main crisis was actually a total collapse of power generation, not power transmission. Other things that we can and should be doing here in Connecticut, number one is insulating buildings. Look, if buildings are well insulated, that means during cold weather, if people are without power, it means that their homes aren't going to freeze and they're going to be able to stay safe. During extreme heat events, as those are going to become increasingly likely with climate change, it means that people are going to be able to stay more comfortable. So that's a really important one. And finally, grid hardening is absolutely right. We need to bury more power lines, and we need to hold utilities accountable and make sure they do proper tree trimming. We just saw the California wildfires burn down an area the size of New Jersey due to improper tree trimming and maintenance from utilities.
And I know one of the big focuses of your research is there's an equity issue in this as well. And it's not just about keeping the lights on in a certain person's house. There's something to the whole community and the equity, especially to impoverished communities, about how this plan moves forward. Right, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, look, the majority of low-income residents in Connecticut can't afford their energy bills. It's incredibly expensive to heat homes there in the wintertime, and it's up to the legislature to invest in low-income homes. Connecticut historically has been a leader in terms of investing in energy efficiency, but they've been lagging behind other states like Massachusetts and California as of late, and they can do more and should do more to improve people's livelihoods through decreasing energy bills, through investing in improving our building stock.
All right, certainly some interesting ideas from Dr. Mark Paul. Senator Needleman, your committee will likely be seeing some of those things. We'll be following the developments at the legislature. We appreciate both of you being with us on this Sunday morning to talk about it. And certainly as we look at those pictures from Texas, we hope we never see anything like that here. Thank you both. Up next in our Sunday Spotlight, golfers hoping for a return to normal at the Travelers Championship. We're talking to tournament director Nathan Grube and golfer Chase Koepka, who pulled out of play in 2020 because of the pandemic. He's sharing his story coming up.